And welcome. This is Peter Winnick. I'm the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage, and you're joining us on the podcast today, which is Leveraging Thought Leadership. Today, my guest is Steve Blank. Steve is an entrepreneur turned educator. He is the father of modern entrepreneurship. He's credited with launching the lean startup movement. He's changed how startups are built, how entrepreneurship is taught, and how science is commercialized. He's the author of The Four Steps to the Epiphany, the Startup Owner's Manual, and his cover article in the May 2013 Harvard Business Review defined really the lean startup movement. He teaches at Stanford, Berkeley, and NYU, and obviously has a blog, speaks, has written a bunch of books. Welcome aboard, Steve. How are you?
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So it is an honor to have you on here today. You have been at this content creation and thought leadership space for quite some time. So tell us a little bit, because I know your blog is quite well known, how it all plays together, how the blog connects to your books, connects to your speaking and your articles, and sort of the whole ecosystem of your thought leadership, if you could.
Yeah, so I think I had somewhat of a unique experience. At first the blog started not to sell a book or a consulting, but I was had some ideas I wanted to get out to a wider audience, and so I decided to share a couple of ideas and stories and tell my kids what their father actually did before they saw him sitting at home eating chocolates, thinking he never had worked a day in his life. And so I used it for multiple ideas. As I said, getting out the lean startup story, getting out. I started teaching some unique classes. I wanted to share that with other educators, and wanted to share some interesting history of Silicon Valley. And at the time, the blog was probably the perfect vehicle to do that.
So yeah, that was my next question. When did you start the blog?
I think it's probably about 10 years old now.
Okay.
Relatively early on, when it was before people were using Twitter or, Instagram or other parts of social media. As those emerged, I now use those to kind of repost my material.
Yep.
But my blog looks like it was written in the 18th century in terms of formatting. Um,
Yeah, I was going to say if Ben Franklin had a blog, it might look similar to yours in terms of
yeah,
the format. So that's a good thing.
yeah, but
Well, but you said you've now integrated. So what's interesting is the blog was sort of your flag in the ground, and some of that is a function of your preferences and style, and some of it was in terms of what was the optimal modality at the time. Tell me at what point you started to say, okay, so the blog is good and it gives me the traction and a place to have my voice, but now I have to tap into Twitter and LinkedIn, et cetera, to amplify and create the movement. Tell me a little bit about that if you could.
so now I repost on LinkedIn. I repost on Medium. I have a personal page on Facebook, and everything I post on my blog gets reposted there. It gets tweeted as well. So it's kind of a, multi-channel social media. Again, not I would say not very professional, but kind of professional in the sense that I'm using all the channels I can. And at the same time, we're reposting some of these articles and trying to see if there's interest in the first as a hierarchy Harvard Business Review, if
Yep.
it's about corporations, Inc. or entrepreneurs, if it's about startups, yeah, War on the Rocks and other places, if it's about defense. I think I'm probably the only guy who's ever had an article simultaneously posted on my blog, Harvard Business Review, and in Peking in the People's Daily on the same week.
Yeah, that's an interesting hat trick. You mentioned a lot about the blogs and articles, and I want to just push on that for a little bit. So to me, there's different there's different modalities, and then there's distribution channels that are different. So when you're taking a piece of content that you wrote for a blog and then putting a Bitly or whatever in Twitter, you're taking advantage of the modality. I didn't hear you say a lot about various modalities in terms of short form video or infographics. Are those part of your repertoire or your toolbox?
Well, the other thing I did is we put a good number of my lectures online. When Udacity was a startup, I had, I think, the second course on there, and there's now a 500,000 people who've taken my video lectures.
Okay.
So we've done that, and then I've done videos on something called the Business Model Canvas and the Mission Model Canvas. And so if you go to my webpage, there's a tab actually called Startup Tools and Videos,
Yes.
and there are must be 100 videos and links teaching material and everything else. So the blog itself is more than just the blog. It's attached to a web page with a set of open source resources for educators and
Got
people who are interested in innovation. And again, I have the advantage of not wanting to sell anything other
it.
than an idea.
Right.
So that's really different from people who want to sell a product or a service. Though I have to tell you, if I was trying to sell a product or service, I would probably do almost exactly the same thing. Is that people tend not to want to give away their best ideas. I've kind of figured out if you actually give away your best ideas, that attracts people and it will force you to come up with better ideas. If all you're doing is selling the same idea after the last 5 years, you're getting stale.
So let's stay there for a minute because I think there's two schools of thought there. Where one is give it all away, and I'm smart, and if you like what I have to say, you'll want to hire me if that's what you're doing, right? Irregardless. And then there's the other one that says, well, I'll give you yesterday's news there. And I tend to agree with you that if you really want the world to see the best representation of your thinking, why would you give them anything less than your best? Right? Then the group that's going to take it and do it on their own never would have been a client, right? And I don't understand the logic underneath not giving your best away.
Well, because you might not have any more. And so I don't want to. The world isn't made up of like everybody is over exceptional, and then there's no one else. And I don't mean like some clients don't need McKinsey or whatever. They just need blocking and tackling. If those are the services you could offer, then those are the services you could offer. There's a difference between if you want to be a thought leader, I'm not sure I'd put myself in that category, but I do have new thoughts that I share, and I kind of go, Let's share them as soon as like they kind of come out and see what happens." If you're selling kind of a service that's kind of an execution service, then that's a different type of
Yeah.
strategy.
Okay.
So you have to decide what it is you want to stand for and be known for.
So, but you said early on that you're not selling anything. I mean, you're selling an idea. But if all of a sudden you were in the role of advising someone like you, except they wanted to traditionally sell it. They wanted to monetize the content through tools, consulting services, the usual array of options. What would you advise them to do this the same as what you're doing, and what might be different?
Well, I would in fact, instead of, I kind of talk about high level ideas and whatever, but if you're doing consulting, people have problems they want to have solved. So number one is I would be talking about their problems rather than you,
Okay.
and talking about, here are the things we've solved for other people, or here are the tools we've built to solve these kinds of things. And every article should probably end with, and if you have a problem that sounds like that, we're the experts at solving them. Contact us here.
So it would be less methodology or framework specific and more from the problem backwards
Yeah,
in terms of the narrative.
it's the difference between proselytizing a religion and proselytizing the life you could get if you follow the religion, right? So one could tell you all about the details of the religion, but if I don't understand that I'm going to have 29 virgins in heaven, I might not be interested. Um,
Right. Right.
but if you could explain to me the outcome, or and what you solve for me, I could live a better life and my company will be more productive, or I could drop more money to the bottom line. Gee, now I think you understand the problem I have, and I might want to engage with you and understand what your secret sauce is. And as I said, it might not even be a secret sauce. It just
Sure.
might be you've seen the movie so many times. You're actually good at solving the top 80% of the problems that most organizations have in the domain you're interested in working in.
So what else would you do differently then, or more of, again, if you were selling it versus giving it away? So I like the problem focus. Anything else you might do differently?
So case studies,
Case studies. Okay.
case
Got
studies.
it.
So I tend to write in, I kind of write in euphemisms of Bob and Sally were sitting at the table and come to me for advice. And because I kind of like hide the who it is and whatever, I
Yeah,
would be,
sure.
I, I would be very specific about solving specific problems, and more importantly, the results that happened after you did, such that people reading that kind of go, wow, this is a person who not only comes in, understands our problem, comes up with a solution, but is actually interested in an outcome that's aligned with my needs, who's ever hiring you, and the needs of the company who's paying you.
No, good stuff. If you're enjoying this episode of Leveraging Thought Leadership, please make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help spread the word about our podcast, please leave us a review and share it with your friends. We're available on Apple Podcast and on all major listening apps, as well as at thoughtleadershipleverage.com/podcasts. I want to go down a little bit of a different path for a moment if we could. So I think I would be remiss if I had sort of the father of the lean startup movement on the line and didn't ask about how to apply the principles of lean in a content-based business. So the people that are listening and the people that I work with are authors, speakers, thought leaders, consultants, etc., that are looking to scale, leverage, and monetize their content, right? Because it doesn't scale if you're the author and you have a book and the only product is your book or your keynote. So how would you apply some lean startup principles to a content-based practice that's looking to turn into a business that's a little bit more scalable?
Well, one of the things is when you start this content business, you have a set of hypotheses about customers, about needs, about audience, about messages, about messengers. It's just back to blocking and tackling 101. I would write down what
Okay.
all your hypotheses are. Who's my customers? Who are the buyers and who's whatever? And then instead of creating a whole pile of stuff and a whole website or whatever the media strategy is, I would actually go test this with some of your potential audience. You know, what do you listen to? What do you read? Why do you read it? Which ones do you read the most? Why is that like engaging? How much time do you have?
So let's push that down to a book, right? So I want to apply the principles because I know that lean startup principles work. So there's two ways I've seen people, more than two, but for simplicity's sake, I'll get it down to two. People write a book, right? They get an idea, they study it, they research it, they do their interviews, they write the book, and there's some outcome. The other way is they're more methodical and testing. So they're going to write a blog, a bunch of blogs, and then this one bubbles up to the top, and you go, "Ooh, that resonated. I'm going to go deeper there." And then something else bubbles up. So they're using the internet and blogs and other formats, short form video, etc., as basically an R&D tool in service of writing the right book. How would you respond to that?
Well, it depends on what your mindset is. I mean, you could decide that you have a topic you're passionate on. And by the way, that was mine. I really didn't care whether anybody understood what customer discovery and what became lean was, because if I would have asked them, no one would have said they were interested because I was creating something that was disruptive. So you got to be careful what you're asking. I followed my passion and realized I was either very wrong or very right. So there's one is no, there's one is you're creating something disruptive and asking people what do they think in a new market or new segment. That's a divide by zero answer. That is, no one knows what the hell you're talking about first. So follow your
Right.
passion.
Right.
The other is
Yep.
you're entering an existing market that one you're going to either do a better version of with new content or service, or you're going to kind of do some new spin on an existing market. Then you could do some interesting discovery. I just wanted to segment that. You can't focus group something that's never existed before, or you'll get like, well, we don't want it. Well, therefore, nothing new would ever be created. So you got to make sure you're like understanding what path you're going down. You're going to be okay if people say, "Well, you're writing the book. I don't get it. I don't need it. I don't want it. This is crazy." That's what happened in the beginning with me with the lean. Every business school professor I talked to said, "Look, Steve, we consult for companies of with 100,000 people. You're doing this stuff for startups. How hard could six people in a garage be? They don't need their own methodology." Turns out they were all wrong. Six people in a garage is very different than consulting for a large company, and the book I wrote was not like people were standing there saying, "We can't wait for this." But I saw something they didn't. So the question your audience needs to ask is if you're writing a book or coming out with a new service is, do you think you see something that no one else does? Do you hear something that no one else does? If so, you're A, either a visionary, or B, you're hallucinating. And only time will tell which one's true. You got to decide if you want to spend your time doing that.
Interesting. So there's a time to be methodical, and there's a time to say I'm just getting this out there and I don't care. Like I know,
No,
right, right.
not only I know that I'm willing to spend my time and bet because I'm driven by passion here, not vision, but driven by math. And if you're driven by math, you're not going to be an artist, right? Most artists die broke.
But there's a time and place for both, right? There's a time and place to say, screw it, I'm an artist and I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and there's other times to say, this is actually the reason I'm writing this book. I have some business objectives. I want to grow
You
this. I want
bet.
to,
You bet.
yeah, and they have a different set of tactics underneath it, right?
You bet. That's the point I'm trying to make, is that you need to understand which one you're doing at the time. Either you got a passion you want to get in writing and you don't care what other people think, or you're running a business and you want to build the content and the strategy to match the business.
And neither are right or wrong. I mean, in my work with clients, I'm always asking them, okay, so you want to write a book? Why? What does success look like? What are you writing this book? And in some cases, it's intrinsic. One of the reasons they were put on the planet is to get this out there. That's cool. In other cases, it's very, very deliberate. Of I'm only going to make this investment of time, energy, effort, and money in pursuit of growing my current business. So how do I optimize it that way?
You bet.
A little more manufactured or a little more deliberate, but you can't tell the artist to be deliberate, and you can't tell the deliberate person, oh, screw it, just do what your gut tells you. Like, it's just bad information.
Now we got to probably the most valuable sum of what I've been saying, and you as well, is that you need to decide which of the two you're doing on this particular project. Are you doing something for passion because you believe, or are you doing something for your existing business to grow it? They're not the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. I think the worst is when it's unknown at the start, because then you could sort of pinball back and forth between deliberate and passion. If you don't spend that time up front getting clarity around, why am I taking this on? What am I trying to achieve? Who am I trying to achieve it for? Is it for me? Is it for others, etc.?
Yes.
As we start to wind down here a little bit, what are the thoughts, advice, do's, don'ts, etc., you would have for someone that's out there now that's maybe where you were 15, 20 years ago? They've got something to say, they want to get it out there. Like, forget about the technical of use Twitter instead of a blog, but just general overall sort of life advice for folks like that.
Well, one of the things I did when I started writing, at least what was called the 4 steps of the epiphany, that kind of kicked off, the whole customer development process, is I read almost every book that was adjacent or close in the corporate space, even though I was writing about the startup world. And if you're writing a book about a new tactic or strategy or something, my advice is, if you're not conversant with the literature around you, it's really not going to be a very productive book for others. You ought to understand how your advice or concept is similar or different, and how does it fit in, and are you just reinventing someone else's language, or are you actually value adding on top or next to someone else? And being able to provide that context for your readers is a big idea. So full stop. Don't invent new language if language exists. Don't invent new models if someone else has come up with a business model canvas like Osterwalder.
Yep.
Don't come up with your own canvas if in fact what you really have is an idea on how to add on or simplify or do something else. Stand on other people's shoulders rather than try to create a whole new platform. That would be like advice one. And I see lots of people with great ideas thinking they have to reinvent all of it or people won't respect them. I think it's the other way around. Put yourself in context.
Yeah, no, I love that, because I mean, I see two versions of that. There's someone that, just because the idea is new to them doesn't mean it's new, and it's basically a book of regurgitation, and you read it and you're like, I've seen all that before. That person just didn't do their homework.
Yep.
And then the other is somebody that is wise enough to stand on the shoulders of giants and take the conversation of a discipline to the next level, or add something to the conversation, etc. Because I guarantee you the world doesn't need another book on X unless it introduces some new thinking, a new perspective to the audience, because people just don't have the time for it.
That you nailed it exactly. And I get that down now to a sentence is, so tell me what your unique insight is that hasn't been written about or talked about before.
Yep.
And by the way, sometimes a great source for this stuff is, I'm always amused. Sometimes a great insight is, well, academics have had these papers, out for 15 years, but they're written in such, obtuse academic language. I'm just translating it for practitioners.
Yeah. Well, that's just no different than taking a North American book and putting it out in Korean, basically, right? It's a translation exercise.
And by the way, that's valid. I mean, that was Jeff
Yeah,
Morley
totally
crossing the
valid.
chasm. Okay, more translated Everett, and but it popularized something that had never been widely understood. That's also an okay thing.
Yep,
But be clear about it to yourself and others. And if you can't describe what the insight is, you ought to be thinking about whether the world needs another one of your like books.
exactly. Well, this has been great, Steve. I appreciate your sharing with us your wisdom and your knowledge and your thoughts and your processes and methodologies and being clear to folks that they're free to choose and pick what they want based on their situation and where they are. So thank you so much for joining us today, Steve. I appreciate it.
Great. And if your listeners want to go see my website, it's at steveblank.com.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
To learn more about Thought Leadership Leverage, please visit our website at thoughtleadershipleverage.com. To reach me directly, feel free to email me at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And please subscribe to Leveraging Thought Leadership on iTunes or your favorite podcast app to get your weekly episode automatically.